I am live. Good morning, it is Friday morning, the 28th of April 2023, and I am reading out of Joan Grant. Joan Grant was a seer. She wrote books of her far memories. This is her 7th book of her far memories. It is as Nebunefer, who was meant to be the heir to the throne when Pharaoh Seti dies, but he yields the crook and flail to his younger brother, Ramoses II. The story has gone on, and we are now much further on, and although Nebunefer lives in a retreat, a sanctuary, a remote estate called the Living Waters, he has been asked to come back to the palace because Ramoses has to declare an heir. Joan Grant lived from 1907 till 1989, and we are here at chapter entitled The Old Palace. And I finished it yesterday because of battery, I believe. But I've just seen it's not very much left, so this will be very short. So they're in the palace and they're awaiting the births of, well, a plethora of women who are highly pregnant, and Caradon, is to ascertain if one of them is the one. Penpy, that is his brother Caradon's wife, and Caradon is Nebunefer's brother, and so is Ramoses. They are 3 brothers. Penpy spoke to one of the servants who was carrying a pitcher of fruit juice, and then drew me aside. "It is as I thought. Duat has shut herself in her room again, but I expect she will agree to see me. She usually does. For her I pretend to sympathize with her endless grumbles." "No, I'm very sorry." I did read the end of this yesterday. It was very short, 8 minutes. We are in fact on the birthdays now, the next chapter. I have explained. So, birthdays, babies due. The room where each birth would take place had originally been one of the private apartments of Ramoses I. Here was placed the royal birth stool and the royal birth robe, a circular cloak of white linen, embroidered with the goddesses who protect women in labor, which the queen traditionally wore when receiving the officials who were supposed to be present at the birth of an heir to the throne. It was clasped at the neck by interlaced gold cobras and hung to the ground, covering the birth stool itself. "Pharaoh insisted on sending the birth robe here," said Pramas, regarding it dubiously, "but I've no intention of letting it be used. The royal birth stool may be an object of veneration, but it is somewhat fragile, so I have provided another, which will be more serviceable." "Must I actually be in the room?" I inquired, being Nebunefer, trying to look unconcerned. "That is for you to decide. I, being only a priest-physician, am not sure at what precise moment you expect Horus to inform you of his intentions. When the child gives its first cry, or when the cord is severed?" "I have no idea," I said frankly. "I'm still hoping for a dream, which will put an end to this embarrassing indecision." He smiled and patted me on the shoulder. "We must take heart, for I feel sure there will be some clear portent which will set our doubts at rest. I shall treat them all as though there were no particular significance about their children, and you will find that one woman in childbirth is remarkably like another. As Pharaoh insists that no one but ourselves is to be present, a wise decision for the personal attendants would be overawed should a god manifest himself at such a homely ceremony. You may have to help me if any complications arise." "What kind of complications?" I said wearily. "If instead of the head presenting itself we are offered a buttock, or even a leg. Fortunately, neither position is unduly difficult, and I'm glad to say that I had considerable experience before I was raised to my present illustrious status." "They all look remarkably healthy," I said hopefully. "They are healthy, but we must not underrate the influence of the mind on the body. It has been my experience that women who bear a child to a man they deeply love often find the experience as pleasurable as its conception. Expediency, however, is a harsh midwife. It would be foolish of us not to expect some difficulties in labor, for several of them have already produced symptoms which show that ambition is a poor substitute for affection. He led me into the adjoining room and took a papyrus from one of the chests. Here I have a complete record of all the births I have attended since I became the royal physician. It is a most illuminating document. A queen on an average is 5 hours longer in labor than a secondary wife, being so determined not to let a gasp or cry escape that she holds her breath instead of assisting the muscles of her belly to expel the child. The only exception to this rule was Nefertari. At the birth of her second child, Pharaoh, displaying more than his usual grasp of the humanities, ordered Tua to leave the birthroom, took off the birthrobe, and assisted his wife to the bed, where he held her hand, displayed considerable agitation, and in similar ways shared her travail as though he were the husband of a field worker. It was most interesting. She expelled the child with the ease of a field worker's woman. Obviously we can expect an easy birth to the mother of the son of Horus, I suggested with determined optimism. My dear colleague, in this matter I am no better informed than yourself. I have seen 133 of Pharaoh's children born from a diversity of women, but I have yet to witness the birth of the son of a god. Duat, though she was the fifth of the expected sequence, was the first to enter the birthroom. As she walked ponderously across the garden, she looked at the other girls in a manner which must have caused them to pray that she would never earn the title of royal mother. She insisted on wearing the royal birthrobe and sitting on the royal birth throne. Later she allowed Tamas to persuade her to lie on the high and solidly built bed he had provided. The birth was prolonged and difficult. During the final stages, Tamas sent me to wait in the adjoining room where the old woman I had met when I first saw Duat guarded a pair of basket-work cradles like a ruffled goose, defending her nest. But Tamas pushed open the door with his foot and put into my arms a naked, slippery baby. It is a girl, he said, may the gods be praised, but you had better get used to handling them so as to be ready for the real one. The baby screamed lustily. It had been an unpleasing resemblance to its paternal grandmother. I caught myself considering how much happier many people would be if the midwife who first held Tua had been even less dexterous than myself. I handed it hastily to the old woman. Oddly enough, she seemed to find its appearance gratifying. I drank some wine. I read more of the papyrus which Brahmas had suggested might be a posture to the hours of indecision. I stared out of the window and was surprised that the shadow of an acacia moved so slowly across a plot of hyacinths. Tamas came into the room carrying the second child. It is another girl, he said, giving it to the old woman, who seemed eager for it as she had been to take its sister. He mopped his forehead. Have not yet told Duat that she has 2 daughters. To prepare yourself for tantrums. Tantrums proved a most inadequate description. She accused us of substituting fondlings of our own, of casting spells to emasculate the children in our womb, even cutting off the male attributes of the rightful heirs of Egypt. I had to hold down her hands to prevent her clawing Patmos, while he performed some intimate service from which I averted my eyes. Eventually, with the aid of a brew of poppy juice, she subsided into a morass of bitter dreams. Apu, who was waiting with my chariot to drive me home, was too tactful to inquire why my forearms were furrowed as a field for the sowing. I decided that in future part of the birth ritual should be the cutting of women's nails. 3 days later I was again summoned to the old palace. The girl was only 14, with a wide forehead and small, delicate bones. When Tamas told her she had a daughter, instead of being angry, she wept with joy. Now I can go home and marry my cousin, she said. He told me that if I prayed very hard to Hathor, she would let me have a daughter instead of a son. Why didn't you tell your parents that you did not wish to bear Pharaoh's child? He was most insistent that no one should come to him against her will. She smiled at me. "It is clear that you have never met my parents. They could not believe that I wanted to be happy instead of being made royal. But now I am happy, for the boy who is going to marry me will love the baby because she's mine and never remind me that she's Pharaoh's child." I looked at Thomas and knew that he also was thinking that her remark would have been most salutary hearing for Ramoses. Until then I had presumed, as had Penelope, that all the women hoped to bear the chosen son, but now I realized that should another one display this pleasing lack of ambition, I would encourage it by pointing out the advantages she might expect to enjoy. So when I got home that evening, I asked Caradon to tell me more explicitly than before what arrangement had been made. I had waited until the servants had cleared away the last dish of the evening meal. He leaned back in his chair, his face displaying pleasurable anticipation at the prospect of a meticulous discourse. "The girls who did not conceive no longer concern us. However, as you are interested, for the loss of their virginity, which regrettably is not considered a matter of great importance in these modern days, they received gifts of personal ornaments and household furniture, including 10 rolls of fine linen and 5 rolls of woolen stuffs from Syria. It is understood that the value of these gifts will be returned to the keeper of the royal treasure if at any time there is reason to believe that anyone except the girl and her parents or guardian knows that she had even made the acquaintance of Ramoses. I insisted on this clause in the agreement, for if it became known that she had not conceived, then rumors that Ramoses' powers had begun to fail might cause unruly ambitions amongst the subject countries. Surely even Ramoses cannot be expected to display infallible fertility." "Pharaoh is expected to be infallible," said Caradon severely, "especially by the common people and by foreigners. What will Duat get and the others who do not please Horus?" I made no provision for twins, which is most remiss of me. I have not yet decided whether Duat should have a double portion or only an additional 2/3 of the agreed property. "Do you think she ought to have a double portion?" he added anxiously. I tried not to smile. Am I correct in thinking that usually the mother will retain 1/3 for life, but that 2/3 become the property of the son or daughter on his or her 14th birthday? That is correct, except if she divulges the name of the child, or in this case the children's father, to anyone except the man she marries. If he dies and she takes a second husband, the child will be presumed to be the child of the first husband. I make myself clear? Clear as spring water, Caradon. But are you not expecting too much of any young woman's discretion? A sister or even a friend might surely inquire the name of a bastard's father without displaying unnatural curiosity. Neb, I keep on forgetting how long you have been shut away from the world. I find it most refreshing. In spite of the curious times we live in, it still remains a woman's prerogative to name or not name the father of her child. In some things we may be impractical, but not so impractical as the foreigners who accept inheritance through the male line. Such credulity amazes me. However, at times it is to our advantage. He paused and carefully selected a grape from the bunch on the gold dish beside him. It has always been my policy to stir the pack donkey to further efforts by the use of a piece of honey. Honeycomb had dangled in front of its nose rather than to belabor it with a stick. Therefore I added a clause which states that if after 10 years the father of the child is unknown by any third party, except those expressly described in the agreement, then it may expect official recognition, thereafter enjoying the same status as the children of royal concubines. I hinted, though I did not put this in writing, that if a child shows outstanding merit, it might look forward with some confidence to the advancement usual to the children of secondary wives. You've done admirably, my dear Caradon. I only wish you could relieve me of my present duties. I fear they will become increasingly arduous. He pushed back his wig and scratched his head with his little finger. Then, seeing me watching him hastily, set his wig straight again. Neb, you are not getting worried, are you? 3 girls, well, that makes it easier. But will you be sure of the boys? I had another dream last night, rather vague, I regret to say, but Sensen was exceedingly real. Tell me, he said eagerly. You ought to have told me this morning. It was only symbolic. For some reason I do not understand, the room where the child was born was dark. There was a feeling that it was below ground level and no larger than an unimportant rock tomb. Interesting. Very interesting, Neb. No doubt it represented the grave from which the spirit rises to rebirth. Or do you think it might be a representation of the caverns of the underworld? You did not see a jackal, suggesting Anubis by any chance? No, but I saw a cobra, a gold cobra. Excellent, Neb, the uraeus, which the child will wear on its forehead. But what I cannot understand is why Sensen will not be more explicit. It seems to amuse the gods to set us conundrums, but Sensen ought to sympathize with our difficulties. I am relieved that you feel, as I do on more mature consideration, that the cobra is the uraeus. I confess that on waking I looked under the bed, in case it was real. Karaden made a sudden movement of alarm which knocked over his wine cup. Neb, what a shocking idea. Could it be a warning? I must send snake charmers to the old palace immediately. Cobras sometimes infest disused buildings. Then he sat back, sighing with relief. Neb, for a moment I was seriously alarmed. Of course no cobras are here, for I made special provision for 50 mongoose to be let loose in the old palace some months ago. Their keeper informs me that they found only 5 harmless snakes and 2 asps. But my foresight was well justified, for they have killed over 500 rats, large rats, such as cost more to the granaries than a low Nile. I agree that our fears are groundless, but I suggest you mention my dream to no one, not even Penpy. If anyone became known that I had even the most ephemeral cobra at the back of my mind, they would be smuggled in baskets to the birthroom. And though I already bear the scars of Duat's nails, a cobra's fangs are more inconclusive. Right, so I'm finishing this as part 1. It is entitled Birthdays, and it continues for a few pages, hence I'm stopping for the second part. Have a lovely Thursday. No, Friday. It's Friday. Yay!